and welcome to this episode of Mindset Mentoring for Athletes, Families, and Entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Coach Chuck, and today's guest is a pastor, author, and leadership coach whose life has been guided by faith, perseverance, and the lessons of one of the world's greatest dreamers, Walt Disney. His story reminds us that resilience, gratitude, and a growth mindset aren't just principles of success, they're pillars of faith and purpose. You'll want to stay tuned for this conversation.
It doesn't yell, it doesn't bleed, but it's killing us slowly, quietly. Stress, the invisible enemy behind sleepless nights, fractured relationships, fading focus, and dreams left in the dust. It's not just adults. It's our kids, our players, our students. We think it's the stress itself that's the enemy. But the real danger, how we've been conditioned to react to it. What if our normal reaction to stress doesn't have to be normal? What if the most powerful weapon against stress is already inside you?
Welcome back. Our guest today is Pastor Bill Brunson, a husband, father, and proud grandfather to four. He's a seasoned leader who has spent decades guiding churches, foundations, and faith communities with wisdom, integrity, and vision. Bill is a Maxwell certified coach, a DISC consultant, and the author of a powerful new book that explores the connections between faith, leadership, and the creative spirit of Walt Disney. He has studied at the Disney Institute, diving deep into what made Walt Disney an extraordinary innovator and resilient leader. Through his work at Deeper Purpose Coaching, Pastor Brunson helps Christian business leaders, pastors, and church staff members grow in their God-given potential, developing the mindset, gratitude, and perseverance needed to thrive in a changing world. A lifelong student of leadership and faith, Bill reminds us that while life is filled with challenges, whether grieving or caregiving or cultural change, our mindset and our faith determine how we rise to meet them. It's an honor to welcome Pastor Bill Brunson to the show. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Chuck. Glad to be here.
It's an honor to have you, and I always kind of begin with giving my guests a chance to just introduce themselves to my audience. Just give us a little kind of snapshot of who you are, and maybe how the ministry calls you, and just give us a little context to who you are.
All right. Well, you've covered a lot already, but I was called into ministry when I was 19 years old. And so this is, being in ministry and being in servant leadership is really all that I've ever known, all that I've ever done. And what I realized early on was that if you're going to be a pastor, if you're going to make an impact in the world, then you need to step up and be a leader. And so I began trying to learn how to be a leader very early on, and had probably more leadership failures in those early years than I want to remember. But it has shaped my life as I've moved through serving churches of different sizes and leading at different levels, being able to then train as a coach to try to impact the lives of other leaders. This has been a journey, and that's what leadership is staying in the journey all the way through.
Thank you for that. Now, you said you were called to the ministry at 19. So was there, did you grow up in the church? So did you have that strong foundation already? And some people talk about that calling, and whether it doesn't have to be into the ministry, but whatever it is. And I'm always curious how they know. What is it that happens inside that you kind of know, oh no, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So can you, I guess there was a two-part question there. Did you grow up in the church, and how did you know? Was it a feeling? How did you know that that was your calling?
I did. I grew up in the church. My parents were very active in their church, in our church, and they were leaders in our church. My I came along late in my parents' life. My dad was a World War II veteran. I was the only kid in school that whose dad was a World War II veteran. But I came along late, and it was an experience that they had built their lives on their faith. And so when I came into their life, that was the fourth child in the family, and their whole family life had been built around church, work and church. And so that's how they engaged their community. And so I was raised in that. So when I left home to go to college, I really thought at first I was going to go into, I guess you could say, the family business, which would be accounting and finance. My dad was a banker. I had two sisters who were accountants, and so it really was. I was thinking that was sort of the path I was on, um, but it didn't feel right. And having grown up in church, I went and talked to my pastor and asked my pastor, so this doesn't feel right. How do I know what God wants me to do, not just what family tradition and family history says I should do? And of course, his answer immediately was, well, pray, which was not something I'd done about my life calling. And so I began praying about it and asking God to open doors that would indicate which direction I should head, and that I was open to anything and everything that he would call me to. And suddenly I was invited to speak at something church related, and then I was invited to speak at something else church related. And then as a 19-year-old, I was asked to be one of the leaders of our men's group at church. And so suddenly I'm finding myself with speaking opportunities at church and leadership opportunities at church. And I began praying, God, are you opening a door here that you want me to be in ministry of some sort? And I kept feeling calm around that. Um, I would talk to people about it, and they would say that's absolutely terrifying, to think that I could never do that. I could never speak publicly. I could never be that involved in what goes on in the church. That seems like it'd be stressful, but I always felt this sense of calm about it. And when I kept praying about it and went back and talked to my pastor, he said, well, it seems like God is giving you the peace around where God is giving you the purpose. And that's what I leaned into. Changed my major in college, and then went to seminary and got a master's, and then went to again back to seminary and received a doctorate, and all around trying to lean into where God was giving me the peace, and because God was calling me to a purpose.
I love that. No, I can definitely relate. When I got out of college, and I tell this story all the time, I thought I was going to be going into the Navy flight program.
Hmm.
That was my plan, and God had different plans, right? I didn't get into the Navy flight program. Um, right after I get that letter telling me that I wasn't accepted, I read Tony Robbins' book, Unlimited Power, which changed the direction of my life. And um, I came back from getting certified in NLP and all these other things and tried to run a business. And God was part of my life to a certain degree then, but I was still kind of not really sure. I'd grown up in the church, but I'd kind of turned my back on it. Um, and that business didn't work. I found myself working at a retail store, office supply store, because, well, I had a whole lot of debt I built up. I needed to try
Hmm.
to deal with. And I still remember being on my knees going, God, I have no idea. This is not what I want to do. I know this isn't the direction of my life. Just help me out. So I began thinking I'd get into education, which is what people have been telling me. So I said, all right, I could take all this background I have and get into being a guidance counselor. So I applied for a program for that, didn't get into that. Then they had another program that was for people who wanted to change careers. I didn't get into that one, but there was a woman who sat on one of the many interview panels I had to go through who loved what I had said and asked if I would be interested in joining a brand new program they had for focusing on middle school. I,
Hmm.
yes, of course. And then when I got done that, God started putting in like the first jobs in education I had, I never even applied for. Every job I applied for, I didn't get. So God has a way of directing paths, right? Um,
Absolutely.
now, I'm also curious about kind of what you said earlier, one of the other ones, and it sounds like you and I were kind of brought up in the same way, is when you get involved in an organization, church or any kind of community type organization, you know that there's, you know, it relies on the volunteerism of the members and stuff to function. So a lot of people though, it's like when I got involved in Little League and scouting and when my kids were young, it was the same small group of leaders in
Hmm.
all those different groups that were doing all the work. Is that something that you've observed too? And how do we, is that inevitable? Or how do we help people understand that leadership has so many different faces to it? Can you talk about
Yeah,
that for?
it seems like in everything, Pareto's rule seems to always rule that you get 80% of the work out of 20% of the people. You can rely on 20% of the people 80% of the time. And unfortunately, that just seems to be the way it is. And for me, it's always been the challenge because yeah, I'm a person that when I join something, I only join what I feel really passionate about. And when I join something, I go all in. I want to participate. I want to contribute. I don't want to sit on the bench. I don't want to. I don't want to just get I don't want to get the ring at the end of the season just because my name was on the roster. I want to contribute to the win in whatever way I can. And so I'm always surprised by the people who don't have that passion. And for me, I learned early on that there's this idea of a 30, well, a 20, 50, 30 rule that if when you're trying to do something, 20% of the people are going to jump on board with you constantly, instantly. They're because those are the 20% you can always rely on. 30% are probably going to be no. They're never going to do it. They're not going to jump on board. They're not going to give their time. They're not going to give their energy. They're really, if anything, they're going to be a hindrance more than a help, and which isn't good. But then there's the 50%. The 50% in the middle, they're sort of the fence sitters, fence straddlers. And the tendency, I know early on in leadership, my tendency was to go after that 30% because they're negative, they're no, they're against the idea, whatever the idea might be. My desire was to go and to change them. If I could get those 30% people to switch over and be 20% people, if I could get the no to become a yes, then that would be, I would ride that victory all day long. But you really get very few of those that ever switch, unfortunately. But you miss out on the 50% when you do that. And so that's where I started leaning into is how do I get the 50% to understand and to see what I'm doing or to see what opportunity is there. And and for that 50%, then I view it as my goal is to cast the vision as clear as I can, to explain the why very thoroughly, very clearly, very hopefully inspirationally, so that they will then accept the what. This is why we're doing it. This is why we're changing. This is why we're going a different direction or trying something we've never tried before. And then I tell them what's going to be involved in order to do that. But until I can get them to understand the why, then there's no chance of getting them to understand the what. And when I do that, then I I've seen it time and again. I can move some of that 50% over into the 20. I can move them from the fence straddler to being on the side that I know that they need to be on. And I try to help them find their purpose in whatever the call is that we're answering.
No, I like that. And you know, my answer to kind of that has been always, well, everybody can't lead in every situation, but we
Right.
all need to be able to be leaders, and sometimes that means just lead by example, right? So we, you know, we could be a member of the team and be a good team member because we aren't being called to lead that particular team, that organization, what have you. But we still need to have quality people within the team doing their part. And I think sometimes that little piece can get lost in all that. And um,
Oh, yes, it absolutely can.
you know, so I'm kind of curious too as we talk about leadership here because I original Walt Disney stuff like when Walt Disney I love Walt Disney, right? So how did Walt Disney come into the picture here with your leadership? And I didn't even know until I read your information that there was a Walt Disney Institute. So that really kind of piqued my curiosity. So tell me a little bit about how that got drawn in and what you've learned from those studies.
Well, the over the years, I guess since childhood, my family, one of our favorite vacation places was Walt Disney World in Orlando. And so we would go there every couple of years we would go and I was always amazed at the structure and the organization and well, even at a young age, I could sense the customer service that was involved and engaged in Disney World because you always felt at home wherever you were. And so I was always enamored by Disney World. And then as I grew older, and I read an article once that was listing the greatest innovators of modern time, and Walt Disney was very high on the list. And I was fascinated by that because I didn't know really anything about him. And so I started reading. And the more I read, the more fascinated I was at the fact that his life was not easy. I mean, we look at it now and we only see it in retrospect. We only see Disneyland, Disney World, Disney, Euro Disney. We only see Disneyland Paris and Disneyland Tokyo. We only see all of that. We don't see the early years and the failures. We don't see the bankruptcies. We don't see the struggles. We don't see the strife that he went through and came out on the other side stronger. We don't see that now as clearly, but truly, he was a person that was so committed to his vision, he let nothing stop him. And so I started at one point, I began looking at continuing education events. And I've got to admit, when you when you are a pastor of a church of a large church, which I have the great benefit of being, the great honor of being the pastor of a large church, there's not a lot of continuing education events that are tailored to the large church pastor, because large churches are more of the anomaly than the norm. And so I started looking outside the church world to determine what were opportunities for me to go through, to do continuing education. And I found through a search that there was a thing called the Disney Institute. And through the Disney Institute, they offer 1 day intensive, 2 day intensive, and week-long courses in the Disney approach to leadership, the Disney approach to customer service, the Disney approach to innovation. And you get the heart of what Walt Disney was instilling in his company. You get that as it's still being lived out and still being taught all the way, all the way till modern time. You can still do this, and the Disney Institute actually will go and work with corporations on site. They will come to you and do on-site training. It is it is well worth the money and well worth the time to do any of their courses, regardless of what industry you're in, because the principles that they teach they work across the board. And so we've been able to integrate those into the life of the church. And then through deeper purpose coaching, I've been able to bring those same resources, those same tools, those same ideas as I work with business leaders and pastors and church staffs as to how they can make changes that will make lasting impact. Walt Disney's methods are still effective. His ability for vision casting and storytelling, it's still what leaders need to do if they want to see their vision come to life.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. It gets my mind going like, I might need to kind of check that out. So what are some of those big aha takeaways that you took and helped integrate into your own life, your own leadership skills? What were some of those big moments, those big ideas?
Well, one was that, failure is not the end. Failure is frequently one of our best teachers. And they talk about through the Disney Institute, they talk about the different times when they were struggling with the development of a park or the development of new systems or the the development of rides and attractions and the failures that came one after another. But what they knew was the end result is the goal. I mean, that's where you're going. And so the failure is just an opportunity to learn, okay, that didn't work. But what did that teach us? Now what do we do next? And they get that out of Walt's life. I mean, when Walt was in his early 20s, he founded Laugh-O-Gram, which was an animation studio in Kansas City. And it was his dream, he thought. It was where he would spend his life. And he had a crew that he recruited in, and they were doing commercials, and they were doing animation for different industry in the area. But he didn't know how to run a business, and so very quickly it became a business that was just Walt. He actually was so poor at that point, he began living in his office and eating at a restaurant until he ran up such a high tab that he couldn't afford to eat at the restaurant anymore because they expected him to pay. And so he sat in his office, he ate cold beans out of the can, and when it came time to take a bath, he went to the railroads, the rail station in town, and he would take his bath there. I mean, and then he filed bankruptcy and lost everything for pennies on the dollar. It was an amazing tragedy and a failure, but he learned so much from that about how you do business and who you hire and when you hire and what can you do personally rather than outsourcing. He learned so much from that business failure that when he formed the Disney Brothers Studios, things changed. The structure of the studio was much different. The people he relied on were those he should put his trust in. It was a different situation. And everything, failure is about learning. John Maxwell, his term is that you should always fail forward, that you should be failing forward whenever you fail. Because if you fail forward, then it's really not a failure. It's a learning opportunity. Walt taught us that. John Maxwell reiterates that. And the Disney organization still lives by that. They are constantly learning and then moving forward.
I'm absolute firm believer in all that. And one of the things I really work on teaching people is how you preserve the learnings, how you go about encapsulating those learnings, right? That's what really matters. And then the emotions that can be held on to because of the quote failure and all the things that come with that, learning to let go of that. But it's all being able to let go of that's really dependent on you being able to figure out what those lessons were that you needed. And
Right.
and when we can teach people some habits and routines around doing that regularly, that's where the growth can begin to accelerate. And I see that in athletics a lot. I talk a lot about deep practice, where
Hmm.
it's the ability. A friend of mine, Mike Bordick, set the MLB record for consecutive games and chances without making an error. The MLB record. Now, man, it might even be 20 years that he's held that record.
Wow.
But he talked a lot about how he practiced. Every ground ball was always about analyzing his body position, his footwork, his hands, every ground ball for years. And it all came together in that one season, magical season, where everything fell into place where he could, break that, set that record. But people didn't see all, not just taking ground balls, analyzing every one, right? And that's that reflective nature. So I love that you kind of brought that up. And also, when your faith in a play is there, right? So we've got this idea of failure. We've got that kind of psychology aspect, but there's a level of faith that needs to play in that. And I know you've kind of experienced some of, we all do, right? These life challenges. Could you talk a little bit about some of those storms of life that you went through? You and I share some of those losses and caretaking things. So I would love to get your perspective on how you get through those tough times, those dark times.
Yeah, we do. Unfortunately, we are we walk some of the same miles along through life. And yeah, my when I was in seminary, I'd married right out of college. When I was in seminary, my wife was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia when we were in our early 20s. And we had a 6-month-old daughter at the time. And then right after I graduated seminary, after after a bone marrow transplant and everything that could be done had been done, my wife passed away. And it was, that was one of those dark nights of the soul when you're trying to figure out what are you doing and why is this happening? And this is a setback that I'd never anticipated and nothing I'd ever planned on and thought about that could occur in my life. But there was a moment in all of that when I was truly stressing over the fact that I didn't know how I would do what I needed to do and how I'd face what I had to face. And I really was overwhelmed by the sense from God that the blessing was I didn't have to face it alone and I didn't have to do it alone. That God would always be with me, that the calling that he had placed on me, the purpose he had put in me was still the calling and the purpose, and he would still be working in me and working through me to see those come to fruition. And so I just needed to lean into that. And there having the faith that we know where people of faith go when our time here ends gave me comfort in that, gives us comfort even now, but also just knowing that the day-to-dayness of it, the struggles and the diagnoses and the setbacks, that you're not alone in facing those. After, when I was a widower with a small daughter, I had the great challenge of trying to figure out how to do things like potty train, braid hair, because she was a little girl that liked the things of little girls. She liked to look like a little girl, so she wanted her hair braided and all of that. And so I had to learn how to do those kind of things. And even in those that are, well, major, the potty training major, but the minor things like learning how to braid, um, even in those, I felt like I wasn't alone in that. And it was a challenge, but I wasn't alone, and that God was going to see me through to something better, something a day that would be where the sun would shine again, and then a couple of years later, I met my wife, Michelle, and it was that moment where I realized that this is the day the sun starts shining again. And we married, and we, not to say that everything has been great along the way, because we, not long after we got married, we experienced the loss of a baby. She miscarried, and so we went through that. And again, you're thinking, how do I go through this? I've never done this before. This is a path I've never been on, but God's with us even in that hard time. And then, of course, Michelle and I, we were, along with my mother, we were caregivers for my dad when he was dealing with lung cancer, and to his death. And then Michelle and I were the caregivers for my mother through Alzheimer's. She lived with us. And then when she had to go into memory care, one of us was there every day with her, visiting her, checking on her, and helping with her care. And again, there's so much in that if you don't have something that you root yourself in, if your foundation's not built on something that is solid and not just simply built on your circumstances and built on the whatever comes your way each day, if you don't have something stronger that your life's built on, then I've just seen so many people crumble. And we didn't do it perfectly. And it's not saying we didn't have some really bad days and really hard days along the way, but knowing that that we were not alone was a powerful part of what got us through.
I think you said something there about not doing it perfectly, which I think is a great statement in that there none of us do, right? So when we go through that, there's just so much. Um, we don't always handle the emotions the way we know we should. We don't, and that's part of being human, right? That's part of the whole process. But again, when we can learn from that and grow from that and share that with other people, that's really, I think, part of the whole process. And um, there are principles that we can build into our life to fall back on to help us through that, to make the managing of our emotions and things much better, so we don't kind of spiral down, which sadly too many people do. And I just lost my mom, and
Mhm.
she struggled with Alzheimer's disease, and I went through a period of this, I'll call it guilt. It didn't quite feel like guilt, but it was about a 40 trip from where I'm living in to visit my mom. And when I'd go to visit, her face would light up a little bit, but I don't know that she knew I was her son. Sometimes I might have been her brother or somebody else. And it was hard. It was really hard. And
Mhm.
part of me is like, I really feel like I should go in, for whatever benefit I'm getting. Maybe she gets from it. I don't know. But then there was that part of me that like, oh, what's the point? She doesn't even know who I am, and
Yeah.
and all the emotions that come with that. And that I I remembered my mom telling me a conversation she had with her mother. So my grandmother, my grandfather had a stroke and was paralyzed from one side of the body, and basically for the last more than a decade of his life, his day was essentially going into the den and watching TV all day.
Mhm.
But my grandmother said that during those years, this is my mom telling me this, she learned so much and grew closer to him than she ever thought possible through that caregiving. And I was just like, yeah. So sometimes through tragedy, somebody needs to learn something, and it's that awareness from it, and where faith can play into all that. I interested in knowing, because I think I can assume your answer to this, but the play of gratitude in all this, right? So even in those dark times, after I lost my wife and the pain of that, being grateful for what I do have was
Right.
was was powerful. The power of literally counting your blessings, right? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, the gratitude is really a game changer. And yeah, being able to, in the middle of whatever you're going through, not get caught up in that downward spiral thinking of asking the question, why God? Why is this happening to me? Why am I dealing with this? Why am I going through this? Why, you know, but being able to stop and say, what can you show me through this? What can you teach me through this? And being grateful for things that you take for granted every day. Um, I know that with my dad, when we were caregivers for him, and he and my mother were living with us because we were closer to where his the cancer center he was going to. Um, just the time that we spent together and sitting and talking and sharing, being able to ask him questions that I might not have ever taken the time to ask, was something that I'll always be grateful for. And my mother living with us during the early days of Alzheimer's. Um, our youngest child, my wife Michelle and I, we had after we lost a child, we then had a child, and so our youngest child, um, she and her grandmother had a relationship that was so rich and so wonderful because of the fact that she lived with us, and so I can see my mother in my youngest child because my youngest child is probably about as sarcastic as her grandmother was and has the same sort of very wry sense of humor, and so it's beautiful to see. Um, the gratitude aspect, it changes how we approach and how we deal with everything. When we look at whatever we're going through and we ask the question, what can I be grateful for? What are three things I can see right now in this situation, regardless of the situation? What can I see that I can be grateful for? It makes a huge difference in our attitude and how we approach caregiving, how we approach leadership, how we approach the crisis of the day. It is amazing. John Gordon talks about the fact that he starts every day with a gratitude walk. He goes for a walk and spends time thanking God for whatever it might be. And I think that when we do that, then we're it enables us to make the most of our situations. The Heath brothers wrote a book called The Power of the Moment. And in that, it deals with how businesses and individuals make moments, either for their customers or for their family, for their friends in their lives. And there's a beauty of that. Well, there's a beauty that comes about when we do that because of what we are grateful for. When I'm grateful for the time that I was able to spend with my mother, asking her questions and getting answers from her, getting her to tell me stories before I knew that they were going to slip away, that they would be forever lost. It's made me realize I need to do that. I need to do that more for with my kids, but also need to do that with other people. I need to get them to tell me their stories, and have those moments with them. When you when well when you lose someone suddenly or through a decline in illness, or when you lose them through something like Alzheimer's, where they slip away a little more every day, you realize truly there's so much to be grateful for, and there's so much we take for granted, and there's so many moments that we miss out on that we shouldn't. And so it really does help you reshape your life around the important and not lose your life in the trivial.
There's stories, so many that I've read from real, well, obviously real people, but I mean, like people who went through some really dark times and came out because of the gratitude that they were determined. Like, there's one story I remember of a Vietnam POW who was like 7 years in um,
Hmm.
essentially solitary confinement. And he talked about, and this is when I went through my Tony Robbins training. He was one of the guests there, about how he just began counting his blessings. He began working on his mind. He began trying to get closer to God. All these things that he could do in that horrific situation that enabled him to come out after 7 years, in his own words, stronger, while a somebody who had been captured at the same time as him ended up dying in imprisonment because he had given
Yeah.
up, he had lost the will to live, while this guy survived. But he said it kind of began with that idea of gratitude. And then, all right, here's my circumstances. How can I how can I make the most of it? And that switch is what really mattered. I want to ask you a little bit too, because your church is a pretty large church. I think you said it's just outside of Birmingham, Alabama, right? So
Yes.
it's a
Yes.
big city, and you know, teenagers, young people, after my heart. How do you take and how's your church go about trying to reach this generation who's been turning away from the church? I mean, my own children who were brought up in the church are, I'm pretty confident in their faith in God, but the understanding of the importance of the church somehow I'm not sure has been, they've grabbed hold of it, and I see that in their generation a lot. Um, you know, their faith is still seeking and questioning. It's a generation that I think we're in danger of losing. So with all this that you've learned and experienced and the leadership and all that, how do you go about trying to reach them?
Well, for us, we're in a suburb outside of Birmingham, and it's a fairly affluent suburb. I'll get it out here, and we're fortunate in that we have three tremendous staff that work with our youth, three directors, and they do an amazing job. We recently actually renovated our Family Life Center to be strictly our student ministry center because we've experienced growth in our student ministries. But I think the reasoning we do that is what we try to do is it goes back to that vision casting and getting them to understand why before we ask them to get on board with what. And so Gen Z are a group of people that they want to be involved in causes that matter. They want to be involved in something that makes a difference. They want to be involved in things that there's a reason for it and not just, well, we've always done it this way, or, this was important to your grandparents, so it has to be important to you. you know, I'm, I'm Gen X, and we're our own little oddity. But there, over the years, that's sort of been the thing. Our faith was passed down generationally, and because mom and dad went to this church, we go to this church, and our children will go to this church, kind of thing. That's just not the way the younger people in our world function. They want to know why. And so our student ministry leaders and the clergy that are on staff with me, we try to get people to understand why. the why of faith. Why do we need to be a part of, well, to be a part of the Christian faith? Why do we need forgiveness? Why do we, and then once we are part of the Christian faith, why do we need community? Why do we need to gather together? Um, and so for us, we have found that when we get the kids to understand why, when our students understand why faith is so important, that what God is doing for us, we can't do for ourselves. The forgiveness of sin, the atonement that comes from that, the promise of eternal life, those things that are outside of our control. Um, when we are able to get them to understand why, then we marry the why and the what. And so if God is wanting to make a difference in our lives, then we should want to make a difference in other people's lives. And so for us, our students are far more engaged in mission than I've ever seen students be. Um, we will take We'll take 80 to 100 students with us every summer up into to participate in the Appalachian Service Project, making homes drier and warmer and safer for people in the Appalachian area of America. We will, at Christmas, our students will provide Christmas for probably 100 families. Every other Wednesday, our church does a food pantry and we distribute food this past week because of the issues with SNAP benefits, etc. We distributed food to over 400 families, and our students who gather every Wednesday morning for a prayer breakfast. Every other Wednesday, when we're doing food distribution, they go out and they move everything out, all the bins with bags of food and meat and things. They get everything set and staged so that when the people start coming through after they've gone to school, the distribution can take place. So we try to get them to understand why faith is important, why God is important, why Christ is important, why the Holy Spirit is important. But then we get them to understand what that means in their life, and we give them opportunity to engage in it. And we plan worship services and retreats and events around, well, what speaks to their soul. And so we try to be very targeted with that. Gone are the days when the church can simply say, this is what we do, you need to do it. We need to be asking, what this is who we are as people of faith. How do we need to engage you in that? How would that speak into your life? What do you need in order for you to be faithful? And so we are constantly trying to find that answer, and we know that it is always going to be changing. But we remember Scripture tells us that you don't pour new wine into old wineskins, or the leather will burst when the new wine expands and grows. Well, we can't take our approach to a new generation and pour it into the way we've always done things, because it just won't work any longer. And so if you want to reach a generation, with a new generation with the message of the faith, you're going to need to change your approach. And then next year you may have to change your approach, and the year after, and the year after. But for me, that's exciting. That's exciting because it just reinforces that, our God is always doing a new thing, and we need to perceive it, and then we need to join it.
Sometimes I think sometimes people think about that when you change your approach, it means you're changing what the foundations that you stand on, and that's like couldn't be further from the truth, right? There's no reason you
No.
need to change that. In fact, when you do change that, you begin the perception people have of you changes. I think that's actually, you know, the reason why some denominations and some others have been losing membership is uh, they see them losing that foundation. You know, I I talk a lot about transforming your mind, right? So
Hmm.
Apostle Paul, transform yourselves through the renewing of your mind, and those shifts. And one of the ones that I emphasize a lot is coming to the understanding that we all serve in some way. Where we truly understand that, it's just something happens inside. And whether you're working for somebody and you're serving your employer, helping him serve his or her customers or clients, or whether you're directly serving customers or clients, if you aren't providing something of value that's truly helping them, then it's just not going to work long term.
Right.
It's gonna crumble. And those shifts of thinking are profound. They really kind of it's that mindset shift I uh, talk about a lot. We're nearing the end of our time here. Is there any last little tidbit of hope maybe you want to give people to talk, just kind of share lessons about life leadership? So, I might have some business people listening to this, parents, even teenagers. What would be one thing that maybe you've taken from all your years that you would love to pass on as we wrap up this show?
I think that what you were just talking about, that mind shift of that has to happen. And I think that as business leaders, as parents, as people of faith, as just citizens of the world, one of the greatest changes we can ever have in our life is when we understand that every one of us is called to be a servant leader. That it is putting others first. It is trying to help build up others. I know Zig Ziglar once said, and John Maxwell quotes it all the time, that when you help other people get everything they want, you'll get everything you want. But you are helping to build other people up. I love the stories of Walt Disney and how he put his, he at times he would do things that financially might not make sense, but he was willing to pour into his animators to make them better, to help build them up. He would pour into the park at Disneyland because he wanted the families to have an experience that would bring them joy and to make moments that would transform their life. He was always focused on others as he moved through the years of his life. It was always focusing on others. And even his dream of Epcot wasn't necessarily exactly what we have now. He wanted to show the world that we could come together and we could serve each other and we could grow in our understanding of each other. It's to a point where, well, we would learn acceptance like we had never seen. I think that servant leadership is a mindset shift that is so transformational. It's hard to even describe its power, because when you are putting others first and you are seeing them come to life in ways that they couldn't even imagine, then you are really you're making a difference that will be transformational generationally. Um, I know you do. You spend a lot of time with people in the sports community, and one of my favorite quotes from Coach Paul Bryant of the University of Alabama, when he was asked one time toward the end of his career about coaching football, he smiled, and in his gruff, gravelly voice, he said that he stopped coaching football years ago, that his job was to raise up and train young men and to help them grow into the people that they were supposed to be and to be leaders that would make a difference in the world. And I think that's a shift to being a servant leader, because it wasn't just about the win at the end of the day. It was about transforming the life of someone. And so I would hope that as parents, as business leaders, as athletes, as coaches, as just people, we would learn that the greatest thing we can be is a servant leader. And as people of faith, we know that we root that deeply in the life and the example of Christ, who, on the night when he was trying to teach his disciples everything he could in rapid fashion, as he sat at the table in the upper room, he got up from the table when none of them were willing to do it, and he put a towel around his waist and washed their feet. None of them would take on the role of a servant, but he would. And he says, what I've done for you, do for others. And that's what we are still called to do, is to put others first and to learn to serve and to help them then learn to serve as well.
That's beautiful imagery. And one of the reasons I talk about in the work I do, my mindset transformation core stuff is getting ready, the mind, body, spirit, ready to build a mindset of a champion is kind of what I phrase it. And the foundation of that is a mindset of love. And it's all
Hmm.
about all those characteristics of love. And I do a little thought experiment. If anybody doubts that those are true leadership qualities, just imagine somebody who isn't kind, who isn't patient, who isn't honorable, who isn't
Right.
like, would you really want to work for them or be
No.
associated with them? And nobody. Doesn't matter their cultural upbringing, doesn't matter anything. Nobody wants to be around that person. So it it becomes a very kind of a powerful symbol of that. Your book is that's on Amazon. Is that correct? Is it
Well,
so?
it will be. It is set to launch. It's set to launch after the first of the year. Faith, leadership, and Walt. The power. Well, it's leadership with purpose, power, and the unlimited possibility. And it will launch in partnership with Maxwell Publishing after the first of the year. And so I hope people will find it. That'd be great.
Fantastic. And we will put that little information in the description of this as well. And this will probably be airing. Uh, it'll probably be going up in December at some point. So it'll be close to the book launch, and we'll plant that seed for people to be on the lookout for it. So I
Perfect.
greatly appreciate the time that you took out of your day to share your wisdom and life's experiences with my audience. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to be able to talk about faith, to talk about Walt Disney, to talk about leadership, and how all that just rolls up together.
Fantastic. All right. And for all of you out there, I hope you got much out of that as I did. And again, there's from all the people I bring on, the guests, is little pieces from their own experiences, their own life experiences, their own wisdom that can really help us grow. And it's kind of up to us to pull those little pieces out and grab hold of those and and use that to help guide us and shape us. As always, I will appeal to all of you out there listening. If anybody would love to have me come in to talk about planting possibility and the power of mindset to transform lives, the opportunity to speak to schools, organizations, I love that, whether it's virtually or in person. I always like the in person. It's just something a little more powerful of that. You can reach out to me at coachchuck360.com, coachchuck360.com, and get in touch with me. Just let me know you'd be interested in and having me speak, and we will continue that. And if anybody else is interested in maybe strategizing where you're at in your life and like you feel you need to make some changes and for yourself, your family, your teenagers, your business organization, I would encourage you to schedule a free strategy session. They can run up to an hour. To get that special link, because I usually charge for those, all you need to do is text me your first name, last name, best email, and put down show gift, and I'll send you a special link so you don't have to pay for this. It'll be a free session where we can kind of talk about where you're at, where you want to go, and develop a plan of action that I can share with you. So once again, I encourage you to go out there and live life to its fullest.